most important thing in any conversation you want. And what David would have said, if I'd let him continue, is he would have said, leaders in your leaders, because you spend a lot of time thinking about what's important for your community, talking to people about what's important for your community, and setting goals for what's important for your community. So when you enter into a conversation with someone else, you got to set goals for them. And how some of those goals are the most important part of that conversation. So why did I say that? Why did I say the second most important thing in any conversation with someone else? The reason I said that is to make sure that you understand that even if you, like David, have your goals in mind, when you're talking to a person or a small group of people or a whole auditorium full of people like this, it's important to know what's important for them. It's important to know what's important for them. The worst leaders, the least effective leaders, can set their own goals, but they don't bother to think about what's important to the people they want to lead. And so particularly for you guys, when you're doing voter registration, when you're doing the debate parties, it's not just enough to tell the people you're talking to why you think it's important that you're going to get involved. Understand what's important for them. And make sure they understand their better schools, safer streets, a cleaner environment. If you understand what's important for them, then it's much easier for you to tell them why they should become part of your registration effort or your debate launch. Does anyone want to guess what the second thing is wrong with that statement? Actually, I'm not going to let you guess. I'm just going to admit it. Bill Clinton never said it. I made it up. You know what I learned in my years of teaching? If you make up a quote, you pretend it right into the United States Senate, all the students will write it down because they think they're going to have to know it for a test. So Bill Clinton didn't say it. I said it. David said it. But the point's still the same. A good leader knows what the most important part of any conversation is. You're not going to convince people to follow you. So they understand what's happening. What's your name? The blue shirt and yellow tie. Casey. So let's say Casey is undecided about whether he wants to come to USC. You might want to go to USC, you might want to go to Berkeley, you might want to go to Stanford. You know he doesn't want to go to USC. You call him that. But he can't really decide. So I think to myself, all right, what's important? What's important? What's your favorite subject in school? History. So I begin to tell you a lot about our history department, our history major. And I begin to tell you a lot about the poli-sci department, international relations major, and all you can learn those things. Are you a football fan? Sort of. Good. Then I'm going to forget about you and find someone who's a really big football fan. I mean, if they're going to realize something from the U.S. So I'm going to talk you into coming to USC because you're in the history department. I'm going to talk you into coming to USC because you want to be a doctor. And I want to convince you to come to USC because you know that the Trojans are going to win the national championship, maybe not this year, but next year the year after that. So my goal is to get everyone here to go to USC, but I'm not going to be able to do that unless they know what you want. If I talk to you about medical school, if I talk to you about football, if I talk to you about this, we're not going to hear the thing about
posting
so the first thing we're going to do is second, even if that's not true. Now you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to believe anything this man says to me. But I promise you, that's the only fake quote I'm going to offer you. Probably. Okay, I want to offer you another piece of advice on how to become a good leader, how to become an even better leader. Really good leaders, natural instincts, particularly when you're running for an office, whether it's student council, or Congress, or the governor, or the president, your first instinct is to think, wow, I want everyone to like me. I want everyone to like me, because if everyone likes me, then I can get a lot of votes and get a lot more votes than the other person. Why isn't that a good idea? Why isn't getting everyone to like me? Why isn't that such a good principle of leadership? Does anyone want to think yes? What's your name? Katie, I sent you to medical school a minute ago.
Don't do it.
Absolutely right. Give Katie a round of applause. Katie said very correctly, very perceptively, there's a lot of people in the world. There's a lot of students at your school that all have a lot of different ideas about what it takes to make change happen. If you try to make them all happy, you're never going to get anything done. And the term of art dad in Washington and Sacramento and City Hall is gridlock. Everybody has really strong ideas, and the good leader tries to make them all happen. The best leaders listen to some guys, this is the book. The best leaders know how to make their best friends mad. The best leaders know how to make their best friends mad, and I'll give you two examples. One is Barack Obama, and one is George W. Bush. The last two presidents of the United States. George W. Bush, a conservative Republican, Barack Obama, a Democrat. Both of them have very strong beliefs about public schools, public education, particularly K-12 education. And they had ideas on how to make the public schools in this country better, but they disagree with them. President George W. Bush forwarded a program called No Child Left Behind to make sure that more resources and more attention were put towards students attending schools in disadvantaged communities. Now, a lot of Republicans didn't like that, not because they didn't want money going to these disadvantaged communities, but they didn't think the federal government should be making decisions about our schools. Those decisions should be made in our communities. And George Bush is willing to go to his closest friends and his strongest allies and say, you're wrong on this one. And I'll work with you on a lot of other things, but not on this one, because the public schools and public school children in the United States are too important. 8 years later, Barack Obama gets elected president. And he, as many of you know, I'm guessing many of you read about it and you talk about it in the ASA, has forwarded a program called Race to the Top. And a lot of people in the Democratic Party don't like Race to the Top, because they're not as big a supporter of charter schools or school choice as the president is. And they're not all that sold on the way the president would like schools to measure how successful teachers should be. And Barack Obama, just like George Bush before, went to his strongest supporters of the Democratic Party and said, you know what? I love you guys. I'm with you on almost every single thing. Public school students of this country are important. I'm going to make them mad on this one. Two effective leaders, both of them having strong beliefs, both of them, as Katie talked about, these would make their best friends mad in order to do what they knew was right. And if you're going to be an effective leader, whether it's in school, whether it's in your community, whether it's in the day, sometimes you got to get into something that's with you every step of the way. And said, Brian, you're a terrific guy, we've been friends forever, we'll be friends for the rest of our life. Don't look scared, Brian, we're really not going to be friends for the rest of our life. But on this one, we got to go in a different direction, okay? And if you look somebody in the eye, who you know and respect, and knows and respects you, and you tell them that you disagree with them on principle, but you can work with them on other things, I guarantee you, they're going to respect you a lot more than if you try to sneak around and do it without telling them about it, or if you try to keep compromising and compromising and compromising until there's nothing happens. So number two, you got to be willing to make your best friends mad. Don't remind why you're your best friends. And then third, and this is something what I've seen as being involved with JSA, this is something a lot of you guys already know how to do really, really well. So I'm just going to remind you. And this is something, in fact, I think you should watch for. How many of you are going to watch the President's Debate Team? Okay, that's fewer people than the number of people who want to be president. I'm not sure what that is. Well, the overall number of great people who are going to watch the debates. And I think what you're going to see on the we'll talk about those in a minute. First, one of them relates to the third point about leadership. It's not just enough to tell people what you believe. You got to tell them why you believe it. It's not just enough to tell people what you believe. You got to tell them why you believe it. Think about that for a second. If I come up here and I say, you should go to USC. If you already think it's a good idea, well, then I just convince you again. But if you don't think it's a good idea, you're not sure. If I done anything to convince you just by saying, I think you should go to USC? No, I need to tell you why I think it's good. And the same thing is with the leader. Don't just tell me it's important to raise my taxes. Tell me it's important for me to pay slightly higher taxes when it's funding schools and public safety. Or depending on your ideology. Don't just tell me why it's important to lower taxes. Tell me why lowering taxes will help create jobs and help make small businesses grow. Don't just tell me that you support public schools. Tell me why a wider range of choice and options for public school students and their parents are so important. Don't just tell me what you're doing. Tell me why you do it. So how do you do that? How do you get across to somebody, not just what your options are, but why you form them? There's two ways to do it. One of them, and again, I've seen enough JSA events that I know most of you are really, really good at this. Number one is you offer facts. You offer facts, figures, data, and results. Say, this is what happens when public schools don't get the kind of funding they need. This is what happens when you raise taxes. See, you guys are pretty good at that debate. You You research, you study, you prepare, you cite facts and figures. There's another way though. To help people not what's important to why. Beyond the facts, beyond the figures, beyond the data. And this is something that you want to work around the bottom and get around the time you work tonight. Don't just tell them what you learned. Tell them who you are. Don't just tell them what you learned. Tell them who you are. Let me give you an example. Hey, Juliana, can I borrow you for a second? Can you come up here? Okay. So we're going to pretend for a minute. That Juliana and I are going to run against each other in school. Okay? So here's what you need to know about Juliana. I know a lot of you know her, but for those of you who don't know much about her, here's what you need to know about Juliana. At least with Juliana, 10 or 15 years from now. Juliana graduated from our local high school. She attended the public schools in our community. And after she graduated from college, Juliana came back to our local schools and she taught for several years. After teaching in our public schools for many years, what Juliana did, she did some evenings on weekends, she invented a piece of social networking software. She invented a piece of social networking software that put Facebook out of business. Juliana started a company that became the wealthiest and most powerful company in the world with Apple and Google to share. Juliana is fabulously, ridiculously, truly mad with people and exceedingly wealthy. So ask her for a loan after the benefits program. But you know what? Juliana never got what she did. She always made sure to come back to our local schools and talk to the kids about making it She made sure that high school students who need summer jobs had jobs available in their back. She provided scholarships for us who couldn't afford to go to college so they could come to USC. And when they graduated, she helped them find jobs either in her company or in another field she was supporting. And not only did Juliana and her husband attend the public schools in our community, but all 14 of her children attend the public schools in our community. So let's hear it from Juliana. Okay, now I'm running against you. My name is Dan Schnur, and I'm not from around here. I moved to California from Wisconsin, and I went to private school because where I come from, you don't go to public school unless you really have to. You know what I mean? I'm not married. I don't have children. At least none that I know about. And I've never actually been inside the public schools in our community. I've never actually been inside the schools here, but I watch Believe. And I watch Gossip Girl. And I've got to believe that the schools here in our community have the same problems as the schools in those places. So you hire me, I'll be ready to sue Sylvester once and for all. Stand for the scoreboard. Who's with me? All right, kidding aside, who's going to vote for Juliana? Everybody. Even I'm going to vote for Juliana.
Is that showing what it's charging?
You don't know, except for the Sue Sylvester thing. I think she's with me on that. You don't know anything.
Keeps
about what we do about student activity. You don't know anything about what we do about student choice. You don't know anything about teacher evaluations. You don't know anything about what we believe about the things that make a good school good and a bad school bad, right? Over the course of the day, to be honest, we lay out her agenda for you. She's going to tell you not just what she believes, but why she believes it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm still not going to do it. But, no matter how well I she starts with a big advantage. Because she's going to be able to tell you not just what she believes, but how she believes it. Because she's lived it. As a student, as a teacher, as a parent, as an employer. And so Juliana, again, you may not agree with our issues, you might agree with me in that case, you are going to vote for me. That's right, so I just told you what I believe.
Right there.
So when you watch the debates that one day, but of course, listen to what Obama and Romney have to say about these issues. Listen to what they say about taxes. Listen to what they say about healthcare. Listen to what they say about education. Listen to what they say about foreign policy. But also listen to how they talk about themselves and why they come to the beliefs they have. About things.
Don't touch anything, it's perfect.
And when you watch the debate that way, you're not just going to learn about the policy men. You're going to learn about the men, and someday in the very, very near future, the women who want to lead our country. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. Almost all of you, except for people who are still sleeping or want to go to UCLA, everybody raised their hand. Everybody raised their hand who asked if watch the debates. If I were to be able to get you on the phone with the debate moderators, if I were able to get you on the phone with the debate moderators, if I were able to get you on the phone with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, but I've got a better chance for people who see what would you ask? What would you want Mitt Romney and Barack Obama to be asking Wednesday night's debate? What kind of questions do you think it's important for them to address? Also, anybody raise their hand? If you were sitting on that debate stage and say, what about this question about that or that? What would be better? Yes, and your name is?
My name is Jack from El Segundo.
Jack, raise your hand from El Segundo. What are you going to ask the candidates?
I'd ask Barack Obama why more government is the solution to the deficit, or why government spending is the solution to all of our problems.
Great question. Jack wants to ask the president why government is the answer to all of the nation's problems. And the logical counter question to ask Governor Romney is, Governor, particularly during a recession, don't you think government has some role to help those who are suffering during the recession? And it's a phenomenal question, and it gets, I think, I'm really glad you started it, because, what, good for El Segundo. Because that's the question in my mind that's the heart of this presidential campaign. As all of you know, the country's been through a very, very difficult recession. And there's really two schools of thought, two very distinct philosophies on the best way to get a nation's economy growing. One school of thought that it appears to me that Jack believes with is that if government gets out of the way, provides the tools for people to start businesses, particularly small businesses, they'll hire people, and they'll get the economy rolling again. The other school of thought is that there's a larger role for government. There's a larger role for government, and the government has an obligation to try to spend money to get the economy going, so then the private sector can weigh in. Barack Obama believes one thing, Mitt Romney believes another, and I will tell you, Jack, that is not only the most important question in the debate, but the most important question in the presidential election. Good for you and good for your teachers in El Segundo. Who else has a question? Yes. And your name is?
Schnur. And I would ask Governor Romney why the government does not have a role in fixing economic crisis. We would work with President Roosevelt Biden and not work now.
Great question. Henry, is it? Well, first of all, I think we should have Henry and Jack debate.
I'd love to.
I think Henry would too. He's rubbing his hands together over here. But once again, what Henry's done from the flip side of the question is frame the most important question in this election. How much of a role does government have in society? And should that role be larger or smaller when the country is going through economic difficulty? Jack and Mitt Romney subscribe to one belief. Actually, I'll say Jack and Mitt Romney and Ronald Reagan subscribe to one belief, and Henry and Barack Obama and Franklin Delano Roosevelt subscribe to the other. Great debate. My guess is the moderators will be smart enough to ask it. If not, we'll let you guys on the phone with the candidates. Let's pose the question to the candidates. Yes, and your name is?
Concerning foreign policy, is now time for action, or is it with countries that are preparing nuclear weapons programs like North Korea and
Wow, another great question. Philip, is it? Philip asks, in the area of foreign policy, is now the time for further discussion with countries who are either developing or have nuclear weapons, they use them for ill purposes? Is now the time for more discussion, or is now the time for military action? And I think on this one, even though there's considered differences between the two candidates, Philip, Obama and Romney would probably the difference in the little bit. Barack Obama's not going to say, just talk, don't ever use the military to prevent Iran from developing nuclear capability. And Mitt Romney is not going to go to the microphone of the debate and say, bomb, kill. They both believe that there is a role that you need to talk, even though that happens. You need to have conversations, you need diplomatic relations, direct or indirect, even with Korea, even with Iran, even with some very dangerous even though some very, very dangerous actions on the world stage. But what we agree here is a certain kind of military actions required. And Barack Obama might be able to restore to that point, and Barack Obama might be a little bit after that kind of Obama. So between his opinion, both candidates have different differences. The truth is, I don't have the philosophy on the economy. Jack and Henry's question were like this. On the question about military versus diplomacy, they're sort of like that. But they'll make with time you can sound like that. We don't know what it is. Yes?
Well, I'm trying to get part of the problem and I'm kind of facing it off of Philip's question. If Israel were to take decisive action and strike Iran, would Obama should go over there?
Okay. The question is, if Israel were to take offensive military action to strike Iran, would Obama support Israel? I don't think either candidate would give an absolute answer in the debate for the smartest of reasons, because my guess is the Iranian leadership watches the debates. But going beyond the debate, it's a phenomenal question. And as some of you may have seen, just in the last couple of days, now that Netanyahu, leader of Israel, announced that he next spring or summer, before Iran would have the capability that would create a threat to Israel and the rest of the Middle East and the rest of the world. My guess is, and this is just a guess, that's Netanyahu saying, look, I want you guys to protect Israel, make no mistake about it, but I'm not going to do anything before the election. I'm not going to make either Mitt Romney or Barack Obama's choice that difficult. I suspect, and I'm just guessing on this one, that if Israel were to launch an attack on Iran, or something would not take place until November, it would take place sometime after the election. And I think either President Obama or President Romney would be much more likely to be supportive, given the fact that Netanyahu was going to be somewhat patient. But in the debate, probably a much less straight answer than that. Yes, your name is?
Yes, question for you. And I just want to ask you, how they social media, Facebook, YouTube, are you seeing
Well, these guys are, Tracy, these guys are good.
I know.
Jessica asked a terrific question about government regulation of online communication, particularly in the aftermath of the violence in Libya and 2 dozen other countries around the world after that ridiculous YouTube video circulated. You know, Jessica, it's funny you raise that. One of my close friends works for Google, and she's one of the people who has to make these decisions. So she and her colleagues have been in Washington, D.C., meeting with representatives in Congress and the State Department, hashing through exactly this issue. And the thing is, a company like Google, a company like Facebook, a company like Juliana's doesn't want to do anything to compromise security, doesn't want to do anything to cause lives. So there's also a sensible freedom of speech. My impression, this is just an impression because I haven't had either candidate address this specifically, is given what they've said generally about the role of government, back to Jackson's earlier question, I suspect Governor Romney might be a little bit more hands-off with the role than President Obama. On the other hand, the president, of course, has worked very hard to promote free speech and human rights around the world also. Such a good question, I don't even pretend to have a good answer for it. Tracy, do we need...
We have time for one, maybe two more.
Okay, so 2 fast questions will do. How about you? Can you hear this? Kevin, fast question. Go ahead, let's hear it. Oh, it's a tremendous question. What's going to happen to those people who are living in this country illegally without documentation? By all counts, there are 11.5 million people who live in this country who came here without proper documentation. And Governor Romney and President Obama have very different opinions on this one. Governor Romney talks about allowing those who come in this country illegally, if they join the military, to be able to say it. But otherwise, he believes there ought to be a guest worker program so people can stay in the country. But generally, he believes that most of those people ought to be encouraged to go back to the country once they came. President Obama, on the other hand, as for many of you, it's signed an executive order allowing people under the age of 30 to take care under certain circumstances who are enrolled in school, having had a trouble with the law at the same time early. And he has talked about a broader legalization and naturalization process. But to me, Kevin, thank you for the platform on this. To me, this represents everything that's wrong with politics and why it's so important that you guys get involved in saying that. Because when you watch the debate of illegal immigration on TV, what you hear are two extremes. You hear people over here say amnesty, people over here saying self-deportation, and they scream and they yell and they throw pointing objects at each other, and nothing ever changes. Because they're screaming and yelling and claiming their respect is best friends. All my best friends over here want to send all those people back where they came from, so that's what I'm going to scream and yell about. All my best friends over here say amnesty, let us stay, no holds barred, no questions asked. So that's what I'm going to scream and yell about. Politics is supposed to be. Politics is supposed to be, and isn't nearly as much as it should be anymore. Isn't just about screaming and yelling and holding it ground. It's about looking for ways to work with people on the other side. And it's saying, look, we might not agree on everything, but let's find those things on which we agree and try to make progress. Can we ask 11.5 million people to leave the country? Well, I've done the math. If you line up buses from San Diego to Fairbanks, Alaska, that's what it would take in order to move 11.5 million people out of this country. On the other hand, is it practical to tell those people, the millions and millions of others around the world, sure, come on in and we'll figure out a way to pay for services for you and your family, even while we're trying to provide good education and quality health care for other citizens? That's not particularly realistic either. But that's what people do sound screaming out about. Smart people, the best leaders do, the kind of leaders that you guys are going to become to, is they say, look, I come to this discussion with very strong principles. And I understand that if we're going to get anything done, if we're going to make any progress, whether it's on the issue of immigration, the public schools, the jobs, or Iran, or Israel, I've got to find a sit down and talk reasonably and rationally with people with whom I disagree and find some common ground. Immigration is one of many issues that I know that's been a problem for our political system. Now it's up to you guys to fix it. How's that for some responsibility? So we'll do one last question and then we'll wrap up all the way back.
My name is John, and I would ask either Obama
State
or
your school too.
Toronto High School, and I would ask either Obama or Romney what they believe that these college costs for students who are qualified to go to wonderful schools like USC.
The question is, what do you do to make college more affordable? Not just for students who want to go to USC, I guess. But as I think all of you know, and your parents definitely know, college tuition is going up everywhere. Well, President Obama and Governor Romney have different positions on this. President Obama wants to expand the use of Pell Grants and other student loan programs in order to give you more financial assistance so you can come to school here, or even that maybe a little junior college over in Westwood, whichever your preference might be. Governor Romney says, and this goes back to Jack and Henry's question, in addition to just having government lending money, let's let other people, let's let banks and let's other businesses get into the business of loaning students money also. So there's competition, maybe they'll offer lower rates and a better deal here. Both of them want to make college more affordable. They have very, very different ideas of how to do it. Once again, terrific question. It looks like there are enough questions left for Obama and Romney to have a 9 or 10 hour debate that nobody watched for 9 or 10 hours except for us. So I think we're going to So what I'm going to do really quickly, then I'm going to get out of here because you guys are already behind schedule, and the CEO over here is getting angry with me. I asked earlier, how many of you want to run for office? I'm going to ask that question again specifically to the young women in the office. How many young women in this room think they might want to run for elected office or work for an elected office over there? That's a lot. So guys, don't worry, we're going to do programming for you also, but this next message is delivered specifically for those young women in the room who think they might want to run someday. We co-sponsor a program at USC out of our Institute of Politics, along with a national organization called Running Start. Running Start, and I encourage you guys to Google Running Start again today, not what people are talking about. And Running Start is a national organization that promotes the idea of women running for office and the importance of women running for office. And the really unique thing about Running Start is they don't go to old people like me. They don't go to people even in their 20s and 30s. They go to high school kids, high school young women. Say, look, you know you're not going to run while you're still in high school. Obviously, you only wait a couple of years. You know you're not going to run while you're in high school, but we want you to start thinking about it now. And even while you're 16 or 17 or 18 years old, we put out these programs in order to help you develop the skills that when the time comes, puts you in a position where you can run for office as a woman, or as a woman help someone else run for office. We've got a conference, and it's a ways off, so make a note, write it down, and we'll follow up with Tracy with the information. It's a day-long conference that takes place on February 9th here at USC. And you look at public speaking, message development, networking, fundraising, and the particular challenges and particular disadvantages, particular challenges that a female candidate faces. And like I said, guys, we'll do something for you guys too, but right now we got this one passed. If there's anyone, any young women in the audience, we hope to see you in February. And then finally, lastly, I gave you 3 ideas really about how to become a good leader, how to become a better leader. And I'd offer you one more. And this goes back to the work that you're being asked to do. The voter registration you're doing, debate launches, all the things you're asked to do as a JSA leader. One quality that, see if you all know this already, a quality you need in order to be a successful leader, when they're telling you want to register more students, when they're telling you to stay in another debate launch, you need to be persistent. You need to be persistent. And you can't take no for an answer. And I will offer you finally what I consider to be the successful 2 steps, the 2 steps that a successful leader needs to take in order to be persistent, in order to be successful. The 2 steps are as follows. First, you fight until all 3 is doing. Number 2, then you fight on the ends. Because when there is something you believe in, when there's a candidate or a cause or an organization or a school or community that you believe in as strong as you guys believe in your priorities, you fight for those things. And you never give up. And you never back down. And you push and you push and you push. And you work as hard as you can to convince everyone else in the school how important these things are. And they're never going to care as much as you do. And that's not your goal. Don't try to make them care as much as you do, because they never will. It's just going to drive you crazy. Don't try to make them care as much as you do. Just try to make them care more than they already do. Then we register. Come to the debate watch. Ask them about what's important to them. And then explain to them how what you're doing can help them accomplish your goals. Guys, good luck. Have a great day for you guys.
Something very exciting. Right now you are all on the internet because we have been live streaming. Turn around to the back of the room. So we posted the link to the live stream website on YouTube, on Facebook pages. So share it with your friends. Everything that's going to be going on in the show will be live streamed, which is really exciting. And speaking of technology, we'll cover this more at closing session. We have a Southern California USA app designed by me. Is your name? Yes, it is. So this is your agenda throughout the day, or if you don't have one, it's on the app, so take advantage of that. Absolutely. All right, and then a couple more things. 116 we do not have, so any activity that's in 116 will be in this room. So for the first block, it would be political economy and education. Also, every single school here needs to have a representative at the assembly meeting, which is during block 2. So even if your delegated assembly member isn't here, you can make sure that you attend or send someone from your faculty.
Juliana, can I interject on that? That goes for the entire school year as well at all of the conventions. you need to make sure that there's at least one person from your chapter who is the designated assembly member who attends the assembly meetings, that are two members, and that can often be a chapter president and someone else, or two people that are the designated assembly members, but it's very important. This is our advocacy wing, and so it's a really exciting, outside of JSA, interacting with the real world component.
Yes. Lastly, at 10, so everyone needs to be in this room, seated and ready to go at 10:55 for the Secretary of State address. And so that means kind of start handing out your activities around 10:50. And I know this goes unsaid because you guys did such an amazing job being so respectful during Dan Schnur's amazing address. But please make sure that you uphold that same level of politeness that you did for the Secretary of State. So with that, have an amazing day, and I'll see you back here in about an hour.
so that the free market doesn't overdo itself and spend all of its money it gets in a boom creating another bust. And during the bust, the government must pump more money into the system to create a more balanced system to get out of the bust. Yes.
Sam Latchinger, Hamilton High School. Somebody mentioned that we need to cut spending, but the thing is, President Obama's only increased spending 1.4%, and every president in the past 50 years has increased spending, and even before that, President Reagan increased spending between 5 and 6% every single term. President Bush, 7% every single term. So it's not like President Obama spending money is something new. He's actually increased spending the least in the last 50 years. So the idea that he's just expanding the government and all of this, that's actually a fallacy. He's even decreased government employment. So I think a false image of him is being painted. He hasn't been spending more than everybody else in terms of debt to GDP.
Yeah.
Lulu Jait, Louisville High School. Regarding FDR's New Deal, it didn't ultimately end in depression, but it set up a lot of economic safety nets, which ultimately would have prevented more depressions, including higher minimum wage and Social Security.
All right, so I would just have to state my name.
You're good, you've already spoken a few times.
So, all right, I would like to go back to the point about Obama's spending. Okay, first off, he outspent George W. Bush by almost $1 trillion. He's only been president for about 4 years. Bush was president for 8 years. So I don't think we can make up excuses for why Barack Obama's spending. Oh, well, it's not spending as much. I still think he shouldn't be spending that much. I think we should actually cut back. He promised that he'd cut the deficit in half by the end of his first term. He didn't do that. So I think, hopefully, when voters go out to vote, they can see the promises that he made and that he didn't make those, and he didn't complete those promises, and hopefully they'll vote him out.
Yeah. Everybody focuses on how Obama made promises that he never kept. When George W. Bush went into Afghanistan, he promised we'd be out within 3 months. It has now become the longest war in U.S. history.
You calling Bush a liar?
I just want to pose a question to my panel. Is the president responsible for every single thing that happens within the term? Like, there was a Republican Congress for the second half of his term, so whether or not you disagree with what they did or didn't do, is the president, even in Bush's era, responsible for every single thing that happens and doesn't happen?
So we can hold him responsible because the first 2 years of the presidency, there was a Democratic Congress. He got every budget that he wanted passed. He got everything that he wanted done. And it just kind of goes to show that there was more money that was just spent. And I can argue that was ill spent. But not only that, but we saw deficit actually decrease. Like he was spending $1.2 trillion and $1.3 trillion within the first 2 years and actually got cut back once the Republican Congress got elected.
All right, I hear all this talk about us fixing the deficit.
Katie Everett from St. Lucy's. Well, Romney is a businessman. He knows how to create jobs and how to sustain a business. So what better person to make more jobs than a businessman versus Obama, who, yes, he's a lawyer, yes, he has experience with laws, but does he know how to create more jobs?
Okay, let's... Okay, continue on one more time, so now I'll get
He's known to outsource jobs, so
Yeah.
his reputation is ruining his run for office. He's known to flip flop on many issues. He's saying that his own business record, he's saying he's a good businessman. Yes, he's good businessman. He's going to cut taxes for the rich. But that's, like, if you know simple economics, it's going to hurt the rest of us. And he's just going to outsource jobs. He's going to create some of them. Obama's created many jobs. But just creating jobs isn't going to help the economy itself. Some doing jobs and spending a lot of money on just random things.
Yeah, Victor Garcia from Westchester High School. Although Romney is a businessman and everything, the plan that he's pretty much laid out for the economy was vigorously, if not an identical plan, or not completely identical, was vigorously tried from 2001 to 2008 during the president's term, and that is exactly what got into the recession in the first place. So going back and trying to implement that plan once more, get us out of the recession or out of the economic experiencing, doesn't seem reasonable.
Yeah.
Mohammed Dalul, Granada Hills Charter High School. Sorry for if I sound weird and if I have a little bit of puffiness here. I got my wisdom tooth 2 days ago. Okay, so essentially what I wanted to just discuss was the fact that we're talking about a difference between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And the topic that we're discussing is government and government spending, aka big government, small government. But I think people are missing the point when they assume that you have a choice on this. There is no choice. Regardless of what presidential candidate you choose from the Democratic or the Republican Party, both of them want big government. You don't spend, I think last year the amount of defense budget, including kind of secretive funding towards private investors and all that kind of stuff, was right around $997 billion. You don't spend that kind of money on defense with the Republican Party saying they want to increase that, and with the Democratic Party saying that they're going to keep it the exact same, and expect that this deficit is just going to disappear. The topic that, the discussion that we should really be having is the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the gold standard that was removed in 1971. All of these things have caused government to increase in size. The one thing that keeps big government from spending a lot is actually putting value behind money. And without a gold standard, there is no shackles for the government to become, to stay small and to stay the way technically Republican ideologies originated from. So the discussion that we should be having is honestly about the Federal Reserve, about the Treasury, the gold standard, and the money with no amount of substance behind it. You're spending paper and you believe in this currency, but this currency is actually just worth the amount of paper that it's printed on. There is no gold backing it. So, that's it.
Katie Montanelli from McKinney High School. Nothing about a plan for like Romney, about how he's going to fix the economy or how he's going to create more jobs. So if someone can tell me what his plan is, then maybe I'll listen.
I just want to mention the CBO, the Congressional Budget
Should I cut to her name or leave it on? Just cut to her name.
That was interesting. Then I went off to Japan to study for a while. That happened because my family had had a Japanese exchange student when I was in high school, and I learned some Japanese. Actually, I had to take classes in Japanese, so I learned a lot of Japanese. Then I really remember all of the important things, like, Pokemon Furikake. That's the rice shake that they make, the Power Ranger and game stuff. And when I came back, I took a business law class and really fell in love with it and decided to go to law school. I was tired of being in the Midwest. I went to Michigan State undergrad. I grew up in Illinois, and so off I went to the East Coast to the University of Virginia, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson after he left the presidency because he didn't think that democracy would survive if the people were not educated. And when you go to UVA, it's like another world. It doesn't have a campus. It has grounds. You have to learn all this whole different language because they talk about it very differently. But you can see Monticello, Jefferson's residence, up on the hill overlooking the law school. And it's said that when the school was first being constructed, he had a telescope and he used to watch every day because it was about 20 miles, which was a long ride on horseback at that time. But I think that experience really, really stoked my fires about democracy, made me think a lot about it. And I had some experiences in junior high and high school, but if I look in the rearview mirror, really were beginning political organizing. I organized my first protest in 7th or 8th grade. It was over censorship of the school newspaper, and we did a sit-in in the hall. I think we lost, but we did get a meeting with the principal to discuss it. And then in high school, I organized a protest. Girls were not allowed to wear pants to school. And this is in northern Illinois where frequently the temperature's below zero, and I thought it was really unfair, so I organized a protest and had as many girls as I could get to wear really nice pants. No ripped jeans, nothing funky, just very nice trousers. And I got kicked out of my geometry class that day. Mr. Comer, who was ex-Army with a crew cut, was not amused that I was breaking the rules. So I got kicked out of geometry, got a 0 on a test, and it actually changed my grade at the end of the semester. But in neither of those cases did I get in trouble at home. And I wish I could go back now and hear what my parents had to say, because both times they had, the principal called and this is what your daughter's doing, and what are they going to say? Because they've been teaching me that it's always a good thing. Stand up for yourself. Stand up for what's right. Stand up for justice. So I did that. Now what are they going to do? And I didn't get in trouble. So very interesting. I really wish I could go back and hear those conversations. But that had a huge impact on me, I think. And if I had been a boy, I'm sure I would have been an engineer. My father was an engineer. Both fathers were draftsmen. I was used to going on the floor of a place where they built the assembly lines for the big 3 automotive companies, and they built the machines that make Bowen wing struts and big, huge equipment. But I was not allowed to take a drafting class when I was in high school. And boys were not allowed to take cooking or home ec. So very interesting. I'm sure that's not the case now, but they definitely pushed girls away from the sciences, in particular engineering. As it turned out, once I got into the legislature, I started doing a lot of work around technology and was glad to have what I think of as an engineering brain, even though it doesn't have an engineering education. So when I got out of law school, I worked at a big law firm, Wall Street law firm, in Chicago, and then in LA. And it wasn't until the mid-1980s when I joined Neighborhood Watch that I started to get involved in politics. So Neighborhood Watch was my gateway drug to the Secretary of State's office. That's what started it. Once I joined Neighborhood Watch, well, I was just hooked. And from there, it was other nonprofits, including one that was really small at the time that some of you have probably heard of. It's called Heal the Bay. Who's heard of Heal the Bay? At the time, Heal the Bay was so small, we were trying to get 1,000 members at $5 a piece so that we could go to LA City Hall and say, we represent 1,000 dues-paying members, and bang our fists on the table and have some credibility. We didn't have any offices, no paid employees. It was very small. Now it's a huge organization that has many multi-million-dollar grants and is the premier organization for protecting the water quality in the Santa Monica Bay and doing a lot of the restoration work. So it's wonderful to see the people who I worked with back then really moving up in that world. And one of those people, Mary Nichols, has been the secretary of the California Environmental Protection Association and the chair of the California Air Resources Board, so in charge of the climate change issues and all kinds of stuff. And I think back to when we were both fairly young lawyers. She was already more experienced than I was. And so it's going to be fun for you as you watch to see who among your friends, and maybe it'll be you, maybe they'll be watching you. But it's fun when you watch to see who becomes, goes high up in government, either elected or appointed. So Heal the Bay, all of that kind of stuff really started to change my law practice, which had been very, very business oriented. I was doing business and tax work and really, really loved that because you're building something. You're doing something that's positive, and I really enjoyed it. But people started calling me to do other kinds of work. I got more and more sucked into politics, although this was local, and I didn't belong to a political party. I just was active. And then came one of the redistrictings that we do every 10 years, and there was a newly created seat along the coast going from Venice, which is where I live, down the coast to Torrance, and the people who I'd worked with in the area encouraged me to run. And I thought about it for a while, decided that I really had nothing to lose other than the income I wouldn't make while I was out campaigning. And that at the very least I would know a lot more interesting people as the result of having done the campaign. And as it turned out, a lot of really interesting things happened at the very end. We started getting music industry people. Don Henley from the Eagles, I remember him calling the office to ask if he could make a campaign contribution and what the limits were, if there were any. I think we played that message about 500 times. Because we had just been a shoestring and volunteer organization, just plugging away. And in the last few weeks, a lot of people started to focus on that race, and I won by a fair amount in a district where I had not been expected to win. So that kind of started the political clock, and I learned that it's a good thing not just to ignore people who say, oh, you can't do that. It's incredible what you can do if you don't know you can't do it. And running for Secretary of State was similar in a way. I didn't know that only 5 women had ever been elected to statewide constitutional office. I just didn't know that. I didn't find that out until I was getting ready to be sworn in, and I called my friend Delane Easton, who'd been the superintendent of public instruction, and she cracked a joke that if the two of us got together in the same room, we'd have 1/3 of the women ever elected statewide in the same place. And I couldn't believe that, but it's true. Now, last year, 2 years ago, we elected Kamala Harris as our Attorney General, the first African American as well as the first woman as Attorney General. So we're breaking barriers, but we still have a long ways to go. When I went back and looked at the chart, when I moved into the Assembly in 1992, I was only the 46th woman in California to be elected to the legislature. Now we're up over 150. So we've made a lot more progress in the last 20 years than we did in 80 years before that. And women didn't start until 1919, because before that, we couldn't even vote. So if you think back, when this country was founded, you had to be white, male, and in most of the colonies, you had to own 50 acres to be able to vote. So anybody out there would have been eligible to vote? Got your 50 acres deeded? It has been a long, slow road to universal suffrage, but the interesting thing about our Constitution is it is designed to allow that. It is designed to allow change after a very deliberative process that's hard, and you've got to do a lot of work to make a constitutional amendment, but it is designed to allow change as society changes. So I'm always interested when people say, well, what would the Supreme Court, the original first Supreme Court, have thought about the eavesdropping laws? Well, they wouldn't have thought anything about them. There weren't telephones, much less, eavesdropping, and there certainly weren't wireless phones where you had to rewrite the eavesdropping laws because they were originally written for eavesdropping by tapping a wire. The wiretap laws didn't work once we got cell phones and cordless phones. Nobody would have had an opinion on anything like that. It didn't exist. But we're smart enough, I think, now to think about those issues. And when I began in the legislature, I knew that the city of Santa Monica had put its planning agendas online on a dial-up bulletin board. So I carried a bill to put the California legislature online. And I had some guys from Silicon Valley come into my office to say, we'll help you with this bill. And at the end of that year, California became the first state in the history of the world to put its legislature online. Nobody had ever made legislative records, voting records, bill information accessible 24/7 online. Now you couldn't live without it, I mean, I'm all thumbs now, and I'm sure you are too. If somebody takes away my BlackBerry, I'm kind of lost. Although I make myself turn it off sometimes for a whole day. So that's what got me interested in the technology stuff, and I went from there, and again, working on a lot of issues that really nobody had thought about. Cybersecurity, spam, privacy online. The governor just signed a bill this year that says that prospective employers and colleges cannot ask you for your passwords to Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter, or any other similar site. Because there were employers in schools that were, as a condition of admission or employment, asking for passwords. I don't know about you guys, but there's plenty of things that are in my Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr accounts that are not meant for everyone in the world to read. Twitter less so than some other places, but that's the kind of thing that we just have had to think about because we didn't have all of those things, and it's going to keep changing. So I really think that those have been fun areas to work. And for me, the move to the state's chief elections officer just was a natural step. There's been a lot of concern about voting systems after the 2000-2004 elections. A lot of rumors that elections were stolen, a lot of rumors that electronic voting machines could flip votes or could add votes or could subtract votes. And I thought, well, at least in California, we can get a grip on this and make sure that our voting systems are worthy of the great democracy that we have. And so we did about 700 pages of study on the voting systems we had, and at the end of that, I chose to disallow some of the touchscreen voting systems and to put some really severe constrictions on other voting equipment. I found things like this. We had voting machines, well, in California, we have about 24,000 polling places on election day. About 4,000 or 5,000 of those are in LA County alone. And that means that you can't just give the election equipment out the night before. You have to start passing it out to people who are going to work the polls several days in advance. That means they're taking voting machines home, and they have them in their car or their basement. So they better be secure. And the version of security that we had a security sticker on one side of the voting machine, the side that had the snaps, but the other side had hinges, and if you had a screwdriver, you could just take the screws out and remove the hinges, and then open it the other way, leaving the security seal completely intact, but having absolute access to the guts of the voting machine. Now you close it back up, put the screws back in, voila, you have just potentially rigged an election, but the security seal looks like it hasn't been disturbed because it hasn't. 6 screws was an easier way to get it done. So we had to deal with some just really basic things like that. And then the problem of not knowing what's in the computer code that runs voting systems. The voting systems are almost all owned by private companies, and the software is a trade secret. So we don't get to look to see what's in the software or what it's doing. If I could wave a magic wand, all voting systems would be publicly owned, the software would be publicly owned, and it would all be disclosed so that the nerds among us can help us out. And the nerds in California really rose to the challenge when I was working on the voting system stuff. In fact, some of the geeks had done some, I say this with great fondness, I consider myself a geek, so some of the geeks had gotten a hold of the software to run one of the voting systems. You know how? The company that made the software hadn't secured its website. And so there was a researcher who was just going online to check out the company, and she discovered that all of the software that ran that voting system was available online to anyone. So she downloaded it all and called up the computer lab at Princeton and said, "You guys analyze this for me?" And that's really what started it. Then there was another voting machine that turned up someplace. You know, if you give out 100,000 voting machines, and in some places they had multiple ones in a polling place, they might have 20 or 30 in a polling place, probably one is going to be stolen at some point. And either the whole car is stolen, which happened a few years ago with a voting machine in the trunk, or someone takes one. And now if you're relying on secrecy, that nobody knows what's in the software, that's blown, because somebody has stolen the machine and can see what's in it. So we couldn't be sure that somebody hadn't planted a virus in a voting machine, and a virus that could upload to the mainframe computer, because the way voting machines work is they take the tallies at the end of each night, they upload those to the mainframe, which then adds them all up, and then the same mainframe is used to program the computers for the voting machines for the next election. So you could easily have a virus introduced in one place, go up to the mainframe, and then get distributed down to every single voting machine in that county before the next election. We didn't have any way to be sure that hadn't been done. And we saw creative students in our research lab do some very interesting hacking. So I think that we have pretty much eliminated the possibility for that now with the security precautions that we've taken. Voting is really different from other things we do online. It's very different from an ATM transaction because the vote is secret. So there's no one who can be sure that the way it got recorded is actually the way that you intended to cast the vote. If something happens with your ATM records, you get a bank statement, or you go to the ATM the next time and it says you don't have any money, and you check it out and you say to the bank, "Hey, I put $200 in there, you only gave me credit for 20. But there is no counterparty. There's nobody on the other side of the vote who can ensure that the transaction was recorded right. And that's what makes it so hard to do. If we spend an unlimited amount of money, I know we could do it. After all, we make software for nuclear submarines, and it's perfect. Nothing ever happens that endangers the lives of the men and women who work on nuclear subs. But it's very expensive. 3 people look at every single line of code that goes into that. And voting machines we use twice every 2 years. So it's important because that's how we transfer power. And our deal with democracy is that we don't use bullets anymore, we use ballots. And we have done that for a very long time now. This is the most incredible experiment in self-governance that the world has ever seen, at least in the recorded history that we know. We've never seen an experiment like this where people have the ability to make the decisions through their elected officials, or in California through the initiative process. It's really special. And so for me, it's very important to keep it working right. And so I'm the tinkerer in chief, the scientist in chief. I'm there to do homework for the voters so that they can think about the issues and the candidates. And I can worry about whether or not the equipment is operating properly and not subject to cheating. Having said that, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to take questions. In the course of probably the first year as Secretary of State, I learned how to hack pretty much every voting system that's ever been invented. And I'm pretty sure, There's probably a job involving that, but I don't look good in an orange jumpsuit, so I think I'll stay away from it. I'm sure that when cave people decided to, hold an election and they said, all right, we're going to have black rocks and white rocks, or we'll have rocks and put them in this pile for Joe and that pile for Jane. I'm sure there was somebody who tried to put a few rocks in the pile before it started, or a few extras they went on. I think there have been attempts to cheat as long as there have been human beings. And so our goal is the same as the goal of the Constitution with its checks and balances. It is to make it so that the system will catch that, and at the very most it can only happen on a very small scale that's not likely to influence the outcome. We've had major elections that have been decided by a very small margin. President Kennedy was elected by less than a half a vote per precinct in Chicago. So with a very small number of votes changed, our whole history would have been different. We would have had a different president, we wouldn't have had that assassination, a whole lot of things that happened would have come out completely differently. So what we do matters, and there often are very close elections. When Kamala Harris was elected, it was 3 weeks before we had counted all of the provisional ballots and recounted and done the auditing to know who had become the next Attorney General. It was 3 weeks before we knew that Kamala had won. We could see that her lead was increasing, so it's like you're landing a plane and the question is there enough runway for the totals to keep going that way? And there was, but I've seen a number of elections like that in California that are that close. So I always encourage people to vote, because if you don't, someone else is going to express their opinion and you are going to have to live with it whether you like it or not. So might as well go ahead and do it. And you all, as opinion leaders, have the ability, I'm quite certain, to influence many people when you start voting. So begin to think about that, because there will be people who ask you, how are you voting on fill in the blank, or who are you voting for? And you have to decide what you want to say, how you want to say it. Some things you may want to keep private. And you'll also find, I think, that, and I've had this experience, you think you're going to vote one way, you walk into the polling place and vote in a completely different way when you're actually standing there. That's a really interesting experience to have. You all set, oh yeah, I'm going to vote yes on that. You go in and think, nope, fill in the bubble for the no. Very interesting. So we have, I think, about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to take questions. I'm going to leave just 1 minute at the end. Yes. You can ask me just about anything. I won't promise to answer anything. You can ask.
Hi, my name is Barry, I'm in California. Yesterday at Constitution, I had the pleasure of listening to our keynote speaker, the registered voters for Orange County, and he briefly mentioned something about voting from the comfort of your own home over the internet. What are your thoughts on that?
That's Neil Kelly, who's absolutely a fabulous registrar. So if you did everybody get to hear him yesterday? A couple schools. He's really, he's very creative. And do you know his background? He owned a bunch of 60-minute Photoshops, which is actually a great background for somebody who's going to be a chief elections official, because you have many, many transactions, and they all have to be perfect. You can't give anybody back the wrong pictures. I mean, some of that could be terrible. But he had that experience of, getting things perfect at that level. So actually, I thought he wasn't talking about voting online, because we don't vote online in California. What he was talking about is something that we started only 10 days ago, and that is voter registration online. We started that, we finally got the software completed about 10 days ago. In the first week, we had 110,000 people use it. I think probably most of you will register online. If you have a California driver's license or ID card, you can complete your registration entirely online. No paper, no stamp, nothing to mail. Well, the way it works is the voter gives us permission to take a digital copy of the signature that the DMV has and place that on the voter registration card. And we use that signature all the time. We compare that signature. If you vote by mail, somebody actually compares the signature on your ballot to the signature on file for every single ballot. That's one of our checks. We don't vote online for some of the security reasons that I was talking about. It gets even more complicated if you put the internet in there, which is not inherently secure. The last attempt to build a system that will allow people to vote online was done in Washington, D.C., and they wrote open source software, which is available to anyone to see, and then they said, okay, hackers, we think we build a bulletproof system, see what you can do. And within a week, some of the students who'd worked on my top to bottom review of software had gotten into the system, And they did a really interesting thing to show that they'd gotten in. They programmed the computer to play the Michigan fight song every time the voter hit vote. They wanted people to be clear who it was that had been able to get into the software in such a short period of time. It's hard to do, and it's really a problem because we also don't know, you need a code or something to be able to do that, and we would have no way to know whether one of the campaigns or somebody who's just interested might buy votes that way by paying people for their codes. And buying votes has historically been in all democratic systems out. So we do register to vote online in California and a few other states. We don't vote online. Perhaps there's a kid in second grade now who'll figure out a way around the security problem and the identity problem, but we're not there at this point. Yes?
I'm Ernesto Mercer from Green Park High School. And I currently work for a state senator, Tony Strickland.
Yeah.
And as you may recall, on the 2008 election,
That was close.
There were 3 precincts in Isla Vista with over 100% turnout. What would you recommend in order to decrease voter fraud?
I'm actually not aware that there were precincts. I don't think that actually happened, but I'm going to go back and check. You have to sign in before you get a ballot. And we do know the ballot numbers in the order that they've gone out, so it is possible to track what ballots have been given out that day, so that if a ballot comes in that's not in that series, you know that there's something wrong. Typically what happens is the ballots are counted at the polling place and those numbers are posted, and then the ballots get taken down to the central counting area where the number of ballots that show up there better be exactly the same as the number of ballots that were posted outside the polling place. That's how the counting procedures work. And then we do an audit, an automatic audit. We hand count 1% of the precincts, although we're working on a more sophisticated model for auditing. But I'm going to go back and check. It would be news to me if we had that happen in California. I've never seen that happen. And I'm sure that would have come up to my office, I think. Yes?
Tyler Judd, El Segundo High School.
El Segundo, yay! It's in my old Senate and Assembly district.
All right, cool.
I'm biased.
In your personal opinion, do you think California, with all this new technology leading to new ways to beat the system, if you will, do you think California is on a path to stricter voter ID laws?
Do I think California is on a path to stricter ID laws? The problem with the voter ID discussion is that at this point we have over 60%, over 50%, and in some elections over 60% of our citizens voting by mail. So how are you going to apply a voter ID law to people who vote by mail? You really can't. There's not a way to do it. We do require identification of a first-time voter if they've registered by mail or over the internet. They actually have to provide identification to the poll worker the first time they vote. So we do have a positive identification requirement. If you don't have it with you that day, you vote provisionally, and then you have to provide it to the registrar of voters or your ballot is not counted. So that's how we handle that. We have found that there are a lot of different types of fraud. That we call voting impersonation, voter impersonation fraud. And we don't have much of a history of it in California, and I think it's because, first of all, it's a felony. So what's in it for the person who does it? Anybody want to guess what the average age of poll workers is in this country? 65. Oh, you guys are way better than the high school kids I talked to last week. I'm not going to tell you where they were. Way close. They started at like 23. It's 77. There are a lot of poll workers who've worked, I've recently met poll workers who've worked 55 and 60 years. I'm telling you that because the chance that the poll workers, and I was a poll worker for a number of years, know who people are in the neighborhood because they work every election cycle is pretty high. So it's a big risk to walk in and impersonate somebody else. And it's a felony. So you'd have to have a huge conspiracy of lots of people who are willing to commit felonies. With my learning on how to cheat, I would suggest that there are less risky ways that one might attempt to do that. Stupid people might start there, but I think they're likely to be caught. I mean, we do catch the people who are stupid people who commit crimes are the ones who are most likely to get caught, just in general. That's not a how-to. Okay, here, and then I'm going to go back up here. But you can find me, I'll tell you how to find me on Facebook and Twitter. So you're talking about the Electoral College? Yeah. Well, fraud, the problem with the Electoral College is not a fraud problem. The Electoral College was set up basically because the founders didn't trust the people. And they created the Electoral College because they wanted, you know, kind of a layer, a buffer in there. If we were creating our country again now, we would never do something that silly. I don't think fraud, generally in our elections, fraud is not a huge problem. I mean, we've had, in the past 10 years, nationally, there have been about 400 prosecutions nationally for voter impersonation fraud. It's a pretty small number. I prosecute a lot more people for changing someone's voter registration on their party ID card. That happens more often than I would like. That typically happens because one of the political parties is paying a bounty for registrations of a particular party, and somebody who's working decides they're not making enough money, so they just take it upon themselves to change registration. Or they register the whole Dallas Cowboys football team. But that's the kind of thing where we generally catch that, but if we don't, they don't come in to vote. So it's interesting, you know, the rolls might have things up, and somebody's registered their dog, okay, but I know for a fact the dog has never voted. For one thing, there's not a signature that could match. So, you know, there's this part of the checks and balances. But I think on the whole, in elections in the United States, we're in pretty good shape. Some other countries, not such great shape, and some states are not as good as California. And I think California's standards are really high. States have their own histories. If you look at the history of Louisiana and the history of Boston, you'll find some pretty interesting, and Chicago, of course, where the motto I always heard as a kid was vote early and often. And one of my jobs is to make sure nobody gets to vote more than once. And we use provisional ballots that we hold out for that purpose. I don't know whose hand was up back there. Tracy, whoever Tracy is.
We have right here. We have one
Okay.
final question back there, and then that will have to conclude. Who back there did she call on earlier? Was that you?
I don't know whose hand was up. Honor system.
Hi, my name is Bowen. I'm from Westside High School. There's a really low turnout among 18-year-olds and typically up to their 30s.
Yeah.
Has California ever thought of offering like scholarships to students who go out and vote or incentives or anything like that?
Yeah, we have, but it's illegal, so that's sort of a problem. I mean, we make the laws, so I suppose we could change them. But, you know, we really don't. And sometimes you'll see, bring your voter stub and you'll get a free donut. And even that is technically illegal because you're not supposed to get something of value for voting. You know, we always have a discussion about whether people should be required to vote. I have instead taken it as a challenge to get more young people on the rolls, and the voter registration online is one part of doing that. The next piece that I'll work on is automatic registration for anyone who goes to the DMV at age 15 or 16, pre-registration. You have to prove your identity when you go to the DMV. And that is an ideal place to get somebody into the voter registration system because you have a positive identification, and then you can track through the DMV records. You have a lot better ability to accurately know where someone is or to contact them if you have a question about their address. You're not required to vote where your driver's license is. Your voting residence is your voting residence. There has been a big increase in under 30 voters in the last 10 years. And it really, I think, comes from Rock the Vote and organizations like that. We also need to do a better job of teaching democracy in high school. A lot of the civics classes have gone. There's got to be a better way to teach civics. I think that placemat with the 3 branches of government is just deadly. It is the snooze of all snoozes. But if we took an issue that's interesting, that most people are, maybe we took climate change and we look at the science and then we say, okay, regardless of what you think of it, who controls what happens or whether anything happens? What happens at the state level? What happens at the federal level? What role do the courts have? I think that'd be a much more interesting way to learn the system than memorizing the placemat. And anyway, as my foster daughter pointed out to me, the lobbyists aren't in those placemats. That's at the diagram. She said, where are the lobbyists? And I said, that's the white space, because the lobbyists are everywhere. And we haven't even talked about politics and money today. A plug for the high school mock election. We do a high school mock election every year. We have over 1,000 high schools signed up, over 600,000 California students participating. Go back. If your school is not participating, you could be really helpful in urging your principal or whoever it is that has the ability to make that happen, to call the Secretary of State's office so that you can participate in that. It's a very interesting, you get to see how high school students vote, and we use all of the initiatives, so it will be interesting to see how high school students vote on the death penalty and marijuana, and then we'll get to compare it with how everybody votes on those issues. So we use real issues and real races, and there is a curriculum online. As I said, you can find me on both Twitter and Facebook. I am D. Bowen on Twitter. I'm Debra Bowen on Facebook. I'm working with Facebook to get them to remove the 5,000 person cap on people who I can friend. I can't right now. But specifically for the purpose of staying in contact with high school students, because I do have students who I've stayed in contact with for 5 or 6 years. So don't be shy. If I don't answer right away, though, don't assume that I'm being rude. Either I lost my password or I've been too busy. Thank you very much.
We actually have one final question for you on the record. What do you believe to be the most important quality of a good leader?
Integrity. Integrity is the most important thing. You have to be a person of your word. In the legislature, if you get a reputation for not keeping your word, you will quickly find that you are completely ineffective because no one will want to work with you. That's the linchpin regardless of your political views.
Thank you so much.
I promise you will see this in a Facebook picture.
All right, what time do you guys have to be back from lunch at?
12:30.
You just sent to the president.
And also, there's drum juice outside.